Welcome back to the O.W.L podcast. I am your host, D. Wayne McCarthy, and this is the O.W.L podcast, episode 22. We in this thing. Now, for those who are returning listeners and watchers of the podcast, thank you for your time. You didn't have to be here, but you're here anyway, so I greatly appreciate you. For those who are new to the podcast, this is the O.W.L podcast. O.W.L stands for Observant, Well-Educated Leader. And if you listen to this platform, you're just that, an observant, well-educated leader. Right now, as always, I have to give you the spiel, the O.W.L spiel, as far as a little backstory why I haven't been posting content as much. This year's been pretty interesting for me, right? I had to take a kind of like a little back seat with the podcast, just for a little bit, not to really go too much in detail, but me and the wife have been trying to acquire rental properties. We took out a HELOC on the house to pretty much buy and acquire rental properties. But, you know, this has been an eye-opener journey, right? It's been an expensive eye-opener journey. We went through several potential rental properties and we found one. We put a bid on it, and it was an expensive process. But when it came down to it, the inspections pretty much had kind of weeded out that we weren't going to go through with the property, the bid. But it was a learning experience. I definitely took a lot from it. But you know, I know going forward how to approach a potential investment, as far as how much equity, or excuse me, how much capital to put up front, what to look for when I go to another potential investment property, and what questions to ask, really. But anyways, it was an eye-opening experience, and that's, you know, pretty much what life is as you go through, you know, your day-to-day experience, your day-to-day journey. You get to pretty much learn from your input, right? Things that you go through and things that you experience. So pretty much 7 months this year, that's what this whole process has been like. It's been about. We took the first couple months to pretty much get the capital to get a HELOC, which was just like almost going through buying a house, almost, really, because you do have to pay to get that HELOC, right? So like closing costs, you have to get your house appraised, you have to get surveys done, there's going to be discrepancies in the mix, you know what I mean? So you have to have a title company involved, all that good stuff. And the banks that you acquire your HELOC through, they're going to be very thorough when it comes down to you pretty much asking for your equity out of your property. So it was definitely a learning experience. So, but anyways, that's kind of been the backstory as far as why I've taken a back seat from making content, if you will. But man, I've been experiencing a lot since the beginning of the year, as far as just global meltdowns and all types of stuff. But before we get into the global meltdowns, there are some parts I really wanted to expound on a couple months back. As far as, you know, we had the presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden. We saw that pretty much America had questions when it came down to these two candidates. But in particular, we had questions about Joe Biden's mental acuity. He has gotten older, and many people have speculated as far as his mental acuity when it came down to fulfilling his position, right? And then we also wanted to see former President Donald Trump be able to articulate as far as why he's the best candidate when it comes down to him being a president again. So one thing that the debate kind of showed, which was that Biden had a bad night. I mean, it showed that his mental acuity was not there. And I think that gave investors and voters a clear-cut decision, really, for the elections in November. We saw that President Donald Trump was potentially going to be the victor in November. So you saw that there was certainty in the market, right? The market began to climb at that point because the market likes certainty. It doesn't like uncertainty. And so we saw the market began to climb. But This also called for the Democrats to come together and and ask President Joe Biden to step down, just because he dropped so much in the polls as far as in favor, right? This led to the Democrats withholding funds from him and everything. So they pretty much asked for him not to rerun for an election, right? And as a result, he stepped down, and Vice President Kamala Harris decided to step up and accept the Democrats' nomination for the Democratic Party, right? So this, pretty much brought uncertainty to the markets again, right? So we started to see that the markets began to waver because America and investors want to know what policies are going to be implemented if these candidates are elected, right? Because they have two different schools of thinking, right? You have your conservatives, your right wing, who are more conservative when it comes to fiscal spending. They don't believe in social programs as much, versus the left. The far left, they have their progressive views, right? They do believe in fiscal spending. They do believe in social programs. They do believe in a lot more different, ideology than the right does. You hear more green talk when it comes down to the Democrats and the left versus the conservatives. It's pretty much, at the end of the day, we go with what we know, which is oil. You know what I mean? We go with conservative values, right? And which is, nothing wrong with either party's beliefs per se, as long as you can come to a middle ground, if you will. I think being more of a moderate is more temperament for me. But anyways, so this has led to a lot of uncertainty in the market. You've seen that unemployment has ticked up, right? These last couple of months, we've seen that the markets have went from 4.1% unemployment to 4.3%, which is a 0.2% uptick in unemployment claims, right? The job report had stated that pretty much they were anticipating 175,000 jobs to be added, but we only got 114,000. And a lot of these jobs were lost due to in the sector of like data processing, media, and software. So we've seen an uptick in those areas, and we can pretty much know why, because artificial intelligence has pretty much taken some of these jobs that in the past have required maybe 2 or 3 people. Now, we're using artificial intelligence to replicate their efforts, right? So, and they're doing it better and faster. So, unemployment's ticking up, which is, calling for an immediate rate cut. Many people in office are calling for Jerome Powell to step up and cut rates. Many people believe that he's behind the ball when it comes down to inflation and rate cuts. They think that the Fed is too data dependent, that the data that they use is lagging. And it is. But one thing about Jerome Powell that I definitely like is that he is data dependent. He's not, moved by per se emotions. He does understand the plight of day-to-day consumers and day-to-day individuals. But I think for him, the Fed has 2 jobs at the end of the day. It's their mandate, which is to maximize employment and to control monetary policy. At the end of the day, that's their 2 jobs. And when you have those kind of jobs, you can't be very emotional, you know what I mean? Because one way or the other can really pretty much tilt America. So, anyways, that's another thing that's kind of weighing on the markets is just we have these market uncertainties right now, right? Unemployment's ticking up. Many people are speculating that we're about to enter a recession. Some argue we are in a recession currently. So we are seeing consumers being hit, with the day-to-day living needs. Credit card usage has went up. Credit card debt has went up. The U.S. debt has went up to 35 trillion. So, a lot of investors and voters, period, are pretty much just speculative as far as what's to come, right? There's just too many uncertainties, and the market is feeling it. Not only that, but we had the Japan carry trade, right, that took place last week. So let's get into the podcast. But let's go ahead and discuss the Japan carry trade, right? So before we discuss as far as what the Japan carry trade is, we have to go back to the 90s to pretty much expound on how we got to this point, right? So back in the 90s, we pretty much saw that Japan began to experience a stagnating economy, right? They saw asset bubbles pop, they saw sectors fall, such as construction. They saw that large loans that were given out by banks were not yielding much return, and as a result, you saw Japan became stagnant. Debts went up. These things played a big role as far as and their economy began to slow down. But not only that, Japan has an aging population that doesn't contribute to the workforce, and they don't contribute to the GDP as well. So when you have these variables that pretty much are factored in as far as into the economy or their economy, the Bank of Japan had to do something, and as a result, they came up with ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, right? And this is where we got our model from in the '07 and '08 times during the financial crisis when Ben Bernanke was the Fed chairman at the time, right? So if you remember during the financial crisis here in America, people were beginning to lose their pensions, their homes. People were not spending as much money anymore. And as a result, you had the Fed step in and began to decrease interest rates all the way down to zero. But also, to help stimulate the economy more, they began to purchase mortgage-backed securities. They began to purchase treasury bills to help suppress the yields and also to help the government and pretty much everyday Americans out. Now, as a result, we saw the market appreciate. We saw that people began to buy homes again. We saw that people started to recover their pensions, stuff of that nature. Now, in Japan, when they went to zero interest rates, pretty much this helped them too. This helped stimulate growth, but also too, this encouraged risk for investors. So you had institutional investors pretty much began to do what they call a carry trade, which is a strategy, an investment strategy. Basically, you borrow against a currency such as the yen, and you put it into an asset in a different currency that yields a better return, right? So pretty much with this carry trade, they began to borrow against the yen at these low interest rates, and they borrowed a lot of money, right? And they began to just buy assets such as treasury bonds that yielded profits for them, right? Now, the risk comes when the Bank of Japan raised interest rates, right? So if there's any market fluctuation in the currencies, this can easily offset the returns that investors were getting, right? Because again, when you borrow money from anything, right, you have to pay interest on it. Now, when the Bank of Japan raised interest rates, this definitely put a financial strain on these institutions because they had to pay not only back interest, but they also possibly lost out on profits that they were getting from the other assets that they may have been investing in, right? Because of the interest in itself. So as a result, this became pretty much a global contagion almost, where you start to see a market sell-off due to the fact that these institutions didn't have the money to pretty much pay back the money that they were borrowing. And as a result, you start to see that the Japan stock market take a dive, roughly 12%. And this also affected our markets here in the Americas. You saw the S&P take probably about like a 5% dive. You saw the NASDAQ take roughly a 10% dive. So this pretty much left the markets, shook. The VIX had shot up quite a bit. And for those who don't know what the VIX is pretty much a gauge to measure fear and greed, right? Market sentiment. So this pretty much shook the markets up, right? But the markets did recover. So, who knows the ramifications that will come long term from this? But the markets have seemed to got some sense about themselves, and they've recovered quite a bit since the whole announcement of the Japan carry trade that took place last week. So, anyways, this is something that is playing heavily into just future uncertainty, right? So we're still in this global market sell-off potentially to come, right? And not only that, but again, recession fears have been stoked, right? So we talked about as far as unemployment has ticked up to 4.3%, right? But we're still under the low as far as the average, excuse me, which is like 5.69% according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But investors pretty much are seeing this, right? Because the consumers are starting to become tapped out. We're at 1.14 trillion dollars in debt right now, as far as credit card debt, which is pretty much young adults, right? Probably who are renters between the ages of 18 and 39, who probably don't have a strong credit history, and it's weighing on them, right? And many have stated the reason why they tackled on so much credit card debt is due to loss of income, right? That's roughly, I think, 9% of them have filed for delinquencies or are in delinquency. We're seeing that 50% of Americans are carrying over credit card balances. And it just goes to show that people are feeling it, right? With higher inflation that we've had for the last couple of years and higher interest rates, it's been pretty much taking a toll. Not to mention the wars that we've been seeing and we've been involved in via proxy. Oil prices have definitely played a role in as far as what consumers can afford. So a lot of investors are pretty much speculative as far as can we avoid a recession, right? Because many are calling for Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. Credit card debt is all-time high. Home ownership has kind of been a sticky thing for a lot of people due to the fact that just supply is low and people are buying homes at top dollar, which continues to outprice people who can't afford a home right now, right? And then you also have institutions buying single-family residents as well too. And that's another topic for another day in itself. And I think borderline should be legal. But anyways, there's just so many things that are weighing on investors and voters' minds. Hence why, the presidential candidates that we have right now between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris and their respective running mates, I mean, they have to be able to articulate as far as what the game plan is. They have to address fiscal spending. They have to address immigration. They have to address the trillions of dollars of debt that we're in as a nation. And what is the goal and what is the plan to pretty much help Americans that are experiencing these economic hardships? As far as the current Biden administration, they've been trying relief efforts with forgiving student loan debts, which doesn't go unnoticed, right? Though you may not agree with it per se, but there are people out there who are experiencing hardships, and every little bit helps, right? This is a topic that many would debate me on, and I'm not going to argue against it, but I definitely believe that you have to vote towards your interests, right? At the end of the day, so whoever you go to the polls and vote for, you have to make sure that they have your interests at heart. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's you, right? You have to do what's right by you. You have to do what's right by your family at the end of the day. But anyways, I think the more scary thing about all this, though, with all this uncertainty, Omaha's Oracle, Warren Buffett, has sold over half his stake in Apple, right? And this is kind of alarming, right? And the reason why is because Warren Buffett is a believer in good companies, quality companies, right? Strong balance sheets, and Apple definitely has a strong balance sheet. And I definitely subscribe to his ideology and philosophy on investing. So when Warren Buffett sells half his position, that's pretty telling, right? Because look where he parked his money. He parked his money in Treasury bills. And he currently owns more Treasury bills than the Federal Reserve bank itself right now. Some are very thrown off and off put by it, but I think it's more telling if he's doing that, right? Because he's avoiding equities, right? The stock market to get a return, to go for sure guaranteed return right now, right? Now, for those who are not certain and don't understand how investing works, most people typically want a guaranteed return on their investments, right? So they park their money into CDs, which are known as certificates of deposits, and you have bonds, treasury bills, stuff of that nature, where you get a guaranteed return on the money that you invest, right? Where you get like a 2 to 5% return, right? Versus the equities markets, right? Like stock market, crypto, if you will. You're more likely to get a higher return. Like typically the S&P, the Standard & Poor's 500, gives on average a 10 to 20% return, right, a year. But the thing is, it's not guaranteed, right? So when you have someone who's built their wealth in the stock market get out the stock market, not completely, right, but they sold off a large chunk of their portfolio to get into treasuries, that's a telltale sign, right? Because investors only go to safety, which are treasury bills, in times of uncertainty, right? So for those who don't understand how bonds work, they have inverse relationships. So bond prices go up and yields go down, and vice versa. Bond prices go down and yields go up. So when bond prices go up and the yields go down, that means that investors are buying treasury bills or bonds. They're going towards safety, right? They are uncertain about the future of the economy, so they go towards safety, right? They give their money to the government and they get a return in the interest, right? And vice versa. When the bond prices go down, the yields go up. This usually indicates that investors have a risk-on appetite. They're willing to take risk in the market to get a higher return than the 2 to 5% return, right? So the yields go up because they're to entice investors to purchase the bonds, and the prices go down to entice them to purchase them as well. So when you have Warren Buffett go to safety, I don't know about you, but I was told to study the greats, and you mimic what they do, right? Pay attention, right? So it may be because he foresees a recession. And you have economists right now who are saying there are no signs of a recession. Well, one of the indicators that we use to indicate a recession, the 2 and the 10-year yield, right? They've been inverted for the last 2 to 3 years, and they recently uninverted in the last couple days, but they inverted again. So typically, when they uninvert, that typically means a recession is on its way. Typically, it takes about 12 to 18 months for a recession to start. Now, the 2 and 10-year yield, why this is important, because the 2-year yield is short term, right? And the 10-year yield is long term. So typically, we base our debt around the 10-year yield. And usually it offers a higher yield, right? But there comes a time where people will go to short term yields or treasuries because they don't have faith in the long-term economy, right? So they began to buy up the short-term treasury bills, such as the 2-year bill. They buy them up versus the 10-year because they don't believe in the economy long-term. But when they uninvert, right? When the 10-year is higher than the 2-year, that typically means that there is a recession on the way. This indicator has predicted, I believe, the last 6 or 7 recessions. So it's a telltale sign if Warren Buffett is going to safety, right? He's looking to buy assets at a discounted price during a recession. So what does that mean for us? I mean, if anything, you still should invest every month if you are an investor. And if you're not, shame on you. You need to, because you need to retain your purchasing power, right? Homes aren't getting cheaper. Healthcare is not getting any cheaper. groceries aren't getting any cheaper, utilities aren't getting any cheaper, your gas isn't getting any cheaper, right? So if you want to be able to retain your purchasing power and pass on generational wealth, invest into assets, right? That's the name of the game, because I don't want to be able to look my grandchildren in the eye and tell them, well, the reason why we are in this situation because I didn't take advantage of the opportunity, which was to invest money, right? I didn't sacrifice vacations. I didn't sacrifice the new toys. I lived for myself, and I did what I felt was best, right? You can't give that answer because information is available now. You got people like me who tell you some of these things, right? And how you can use this information to benefit you, right? So, at the end of the day, recessions are where you build your wealth, right? So, stack your paper, you know what I mean? Cut back on the vacations, cut back on the outwardly spending, the restaurant trips, you know what I mean? The vacations. Put your money into something that has intrinsic value, the stock market. Put your money into, CDs. Buy your rental property, whatever it may be, but don't sit on your hands and not do anything, right? So, again, this is the O.W.L podcast. You're an observant, well-educated leader. So, with that being said, I am your host, Dwayne McCarthy. This is episode 22, I believe. Now, like, comment, subscribe, share. Be sure to join us for another episode of the O.W.L podcast. I can't wait to talk to you again. Bye-bye.